Welcome to the Building Institute of Training and Development's presentation of the Building Code of Australia. This is for students currently undertaking the Certificate 4 or Diploma level who may not have a lot of knowledge about the Building Code of Australia. As most of you will be aware, the Building Code of Australia is a document that is adopted by all states and territories of Australia as a mandatory code governing the design and construction of new buildings, and addition and alterations to existing buildings. This presentation has been developed to provide you with some fundamental information, that is, information you must know, to practitioners in the building industry and other interested persons in regarding the operation and application of the Building Code of Australia. This particular presentation forms part of a diverse training program that's being developed as an initiative of the Australian Building Codes Board, which we'll now refer to as the ABCB. This is the organisation responsible for the development and ongoing maintenance of the Building Code of Australia, or what we'll call it now is the BCA. These are the documents we'll be talking about today, Volume 1 and Volume 2 of the BCA. By the time we finish this presentation, you'll be a lot wiser on the operation and the application of the BCA. And if you have a copy of it, hard copy, it's a good idea to have it in front of you for relevance. I must emphasise that this presentation conveys fundamental information. That means it is essential knowledge for all practitioners who work with the BCA. Obviously, experience in working with the BCA can build upon the information received with this presentation, but without this information, perhaps your ability to produce professional outcomes for your clients may be significantly hampered. We've broken down this module into three parts. The first one is the background to the BCA. Second part we'll talk about is the operation of the BCA, and then the third one is the application of the BCA. And you'll notice down the bottom there these are repeated for you so you can see how we're progressing through the presentation. Under the background of the Building Code of Australia, we're going to address these issues: the building regulation systems in Australia, the Australian Building Codes Board, and the role of the Building Code of Australia. Under the operation of the BCA, we're going to look at the structure, the content of Volume 1, the content of Volume 2, and how the BCA content is changed periodically. Under the application of the BCA, we're going to address when to apply it, how to comply with the BCA, specifically Volume 1 and Volume 2. Let's have a look now at the background of the Building Code of Australia, a bit about the systems, regulation systems in Australia. As you can see there, the Australian Constitution gives the states and territories general responsibility for regulating building work. So Australia has 8 separate building systems, the content of which is all pretty similar. Why we need to regulate building work? Well, it's for protection of people during construction, during the operational life of the structure, and during demolition. Also protection of property, but mainly for the adjacent property rather than subject property. Why do we need to regulate building work? We need to promote sustainable development. And a recent addition to the historic content of the BCA has included reducing greenhouse gas emissions, energy efficiency in buildings, and some other issues too, like climate change. Some of the main sources of risk to life they talk about is the collapse of a structure or the possibility of it, of course a fire in the building which can cause devastating effect, and also some health and amenity issues. There's things like dampness in rooms, sanitation, toilets, etc., light and ventilation, and even sound transmission through buildings. Some of the outcomes are not absolutely definable, so we look at facilitating acceptable levels of risk and assess whether the regulation is necessary or even desirable through some rigorous cost and benefit analysis, so we can establish the minimum standards. Typical system is regulation system will comprise of 2 parts, administrative and technical regulation. Let's have a look at the administrative regulations. Example of these issues is mainly along the powers of under the Act, and the assessment procedures talks about referrals, objections, how we go to appeal, how the inspections are carried out and the certifications are done. Of course, offences and penalties when people don't comply. And the last point is critical, and we'll see why in the next few slides. Technical regulations include things like that the building requires a such thing as protection of adjoining property, hoarding to protect the public, signage to warn the public of hazardous materials while we're building, and of course the design and construction requirements for building and structures, which is the most significant part. Let's have a look at the design and construction requirements. The Building Code of Australia is a performance-based code, so it sets the minimum requirements for the design, construction and performance of buildings. There's now agreement in place where the BCA is adopted through all states and territory legislation, and now is the primary technical standard for their big building regulation system. Let's have a look at the ABCB. Just a bit of a background to the ABCB. In 1964, the states and territories agreed to work together to promote national consistency. They decided to tackle consistency in technical regulations as the first step, mainly because the technical regulations were seen as the easiest part of the system on which to get agreement. This voluntary technical reform process developed the first BCA, which was published 20 years later. It was not this prolonged period of effort in producing the first BCA that highlighted the need for a dedicated organisation to be formed to further develop the code. So the birth of the ABCB was in the early 1990s and came into agreement or existence in 1994. The role of the ABCB addresses issues relating to health and safety, etc., and to develop the BCA. So a bit of information here about the board. As you can see, there's representation there from all over, very broad. This slide talks about the Building Codes Committee. Again, a broad representation. So everybody has input. The board is a policy-making group of the ABCB. The staff assists both the board and the BCC, and the BCC advises the board on methods of achieving required outcomes. Also, they have specialist committees